Good morning, everyone. Hello, I'm Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of the Yankee Publishing New Hampshire Group. I'm so used to saying I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review on these webinars, Mike, that
Mm.
that was a tough habit to break. But today, thank you everyone for joining us. We are here to talk about the story-driven strategy, captivating audiences with content. And that all sounds very formal, but we're going to try and keep this very informal. I'm here with my colleague Mike Cody, who is the editor of New Hampshire Magazine and New Hampshire Business Review, and really helps oversee all of the stories that go out from Yankee Publishing's New Hampshire group. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today.
So we're going to talk about content marketing from the very specific angle of storytelling. And I think, at least from my perspective, storytelling is the essential place to start when you're talking about content marketing, what that story is. But what we're going to get into is how we approach shaping stories. I also want to let everyone out there know that we are open to your feedback, opinions, and maybe even if you want to jump in and offer us some of your perspectives, we welcome you to do that as well. So raise your hand if I ask a question and you want to respond to it. Feel free to raise your hand or put some information in the chat, and we'll be happy to have you join in. So introduction. One of the things that I think is so important to know about why storytelling matters in terms of marketing and in terms of content marketing is because it helps people remember things. And it helps people remember things because it puts things in context, but it also puts things in an emotional context or a visceral context. Your gut will make you remember these things. We're, as a species, wired to remember the things that we feel and wired to remember the places that we are. So the more that we can visually put somebody into a specific place and into a specific time and into a specific emotional state, the better they will remember a particular fact. And to that end, I'm going to tell a very brief story, and at the end, see who can remember a specific fact out of this very brief story. And here's the story, and it's 100% true, by the way. When I was 6, I was growing up in southern Vermont with my mother and my grandmother, and next door my great grandmother, and they were very strong outdoors women, running the household, chopping the firewood. They kept a big double-bladed axe behind the back porch. And at 6, I had seen them do this enough that I really wanted to emulate the kind of work that they were doing. And so I grabbed that axe and went down to the wood pile behind the house and decided to chop some wood. Now, things that you probably shouldn't do: chop wood with flip-flops on at age 6. Here's another thing never to do: that piece of wood that you want to chop, don't put your foot up on it to steady it. I did both of those things. And the upshot was I managed to cut off a toe, a single toe, without cutting off all the other toes or doing any really serious damage to my foot, which was very lucky. But I walked back up to the house and was about to go into the house through the kitchen door. And my grandmother, who had been a nurse in World War II, came to the door and said, "Wait, I'll take care of you out here. I just did the floors." And the upshot was after my foot was bandaged, we went down to see if we could find the toe. We could not find the toe. And after that, I got a ride in an ambulance. The hospital stitched up the foot, and life went on. I still seem to be able to walk just fine. At the end of this, I'm going to ask one question about this. And I have a feeling that all of you will be able to remember the fact from this story that I'm going to ask about, because it's a story, because it's kind of gross, because it's a little bit weird. But this is exactly sort of at the heart of what makes stories interesting, is they get at you somewhere, somehow. They're unusual. Mike, any thoughts on that before I go on?
Can I tell my story when I was 6 years old?
Please.
It does not involve amputation. It does involve Harry the Dirty Dog. Some of you might remember Harry the Dirty Dog. We just bought it for our 3-year-old grandson. This is the 50th anniversary edition. Actually, they're about ready for the 70th anniversary edition. It came out in 1956. This is Harry and this is Harry. Harry was a white dog with black spots. He goes on an adventure, gets really dirty. He becomes a black dog with white spots, and his family finally figures out who he is after they give him a bath. Why am I talking about Harry the Dirty Dog? Almost 70 years later, this story is still in publication, and powerful stories stay with people. If you can get a story about your company, your business, what you do for a living, one little piece of that will resonate with people, and it will go beyond whatever it is you're particularly working on at the moment, but over time as you build relationships.
That is 100% true. Thanks, Mike. And just a great title on that as well. Very evocative. So what is content marketing? Content marketing, I hate to just read slides, but in this case, I'll read some of it. Content marketing is the marketing and business process for creating and distributing valuable and compelling content, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You're basically, you want to attract customers to your business or service by creating content that answers their questions, that solves their problems. Create interesting information your customers are passionate about so they actually pay attention to you. Easier said than done, right? There is a tremendous history to content marketing. This is one of the things that always strikes me as interesting because we look at this as though it is a new thing because this is the way everybody's talking about it now. But 1732, Ben Franklin publishes Poor Richard's Almanac. He's promoting his printing business. The Michelin Guide, which is still published today, was started as a content marketing tool for Michelin tires. The 1904 Jell-O Company begins to sell its recipe book. Blendtec, Mike, do you remember this one? The blender that they started, this was early YouTube content, and they would drop various things into a blender to see if it would blend and to demonstrate the strength of the blender.
I don't, but I remember a David Letterman skit that was called "What Was It Before It Was Deep Fried?" And one time it was a pair of binoculars.
It's this was a tremendously popular piece of content. And then just so it doesn't seem like it's all ancient history, in 2016, Arrow Electronics purchased UBM's entire media portfolio, demonstrating that big electronics companies, just like many other big companies, realized that telling a great story was a way to reach their customers. So principles of content marketing. And I do want to say our team here is watching the chat. And I just want to mention to them that for some reason, as I'm presenting this, I'm not able to see the Zoom interface. So I can't see if questions are coming up. So Sarah and Morgan, if you're watching the chat and if somebody has a question or wants to chime in, if you could just shoot me a note on Teams, and I'll have Teams open here next to me, and I'll be able to see it there because I, for some reason, can't see the Zoom interface. So principle one, fill a need or solve a problem. This is really at the heart of it. When you're thinking about content marketing, one of the things you want to be thinking about is how are people coming to this content? You know, we're distributing it in a lot of different ways. We are putting it out in magazines. We're putting it on our web pages. But in the end, people are picking this up because they're seeking something. They're seeking a solution. And in some cases, that solution might just be to be entertained. But usually they want to solve something for themselves. They have a personal need. An interesting point about this, and we'll come back to this again and again, and actually maybe Mike would chime in on this right now from an editor's perspective, that personal need, in order to understand that personal need, you have to understand something about who you're writing that content for. And I know, Mike, we've chatted about this in the past, and you have an experience around this in terms of creating content for all the readers of New Hampshire Business Review and all the readers of New Hampshire Magazine.
Yeah, I'm going to take this opportunity to show how your content doesn't even need to be about you. This is a gem in my book collection. It's a series of about, oh, maybe 18 different interviews. It's made for and by Tabasco. It has it there are recipes in here, but mainly what they've done is pair. This is from the 90s. I've had this for a while. They just paired bios of famous musicians from Louisiana, Kenny Neal, and some that aren't from Louisiana, Joe Walsh. Joe Walsh's All America Tuna Fish Casserole. So they got recipes, they got bios, and they have recipes with Tabasco sauce. And Tabasco was from Louisiana. That's where the company's based. So somebody had this great idea to pair musicians, recipes, and original artwork by local photographers to surround themselves with all this cool stuff to sell Tabasco, because Tabasco has become kind of this generic thing like a Band-Aid or Velcro, where the product itself is so popular that people forget that it's an actual brand. Very successful and really fun way to present it.
I love that one. So what's the problem we're solving there, Mike?
What you're doing is you're kind of reintroducing this product to people who maybe Tabasco's become so ubiquitous that you think about it like salt and pepper, and they're trying to have it resonate, but give it a deeper meaning, because you can buy a generic, store brand hot sauce, but you can buy Tabasco, you're buying history, right? You're buying Louisiana, you're buying culture, you're thinking about a place, right? You're associating that product with music, with culture, with great food, with travel, a much different image than just hot sauce on a shelf in a store.
100%. And I would add in there that the other thing that you're doing for somebody, like for me as a reader, if I pick that particular piece up, I play guitar, I like the blues, that I like hot sauce, that I'm a big Louisiana fan. And so all of those things combine to say something about me as a person that I may want to telegraph to people. It's the same reason when we're making magazine covers, we want to make beautiful magazine covers that say something about the people who read our magazines, because we know they want to put them on their coffee tables, not just because they want to read them, but because when somebody comes over, they're saying, here's something about me. And that again, it comes back to like whoever the audience is for this content, remember that you're talking about them. You're not talking about you. Because all of us as content consumers, as audiences, we pick up a story, even when it's a piece of fiction, we pick up a story to hear something about us. And that may sound sort of egocentric, but we want to hear something about us in a universal way, right?
And to add to that, and we talk about making it all about you, you really want to tell stories. And I think about this when I edit stories. I think about this when I write stories, when I write columns. Tell a story that's unique to you, because it'll have more power. For example, I brought up Harry the Dirty Dog because that's a book that's, dear to my heart. And I've read it to my 3-year-old grandson on FaceTime, right? So that's a story that resonates for me. I'm sharing it with you because you want to use whatever you have in your life, because that will help drive your story to a place where people will be listening to you as a person, and they'll also connect with whatever you're selling, whatever you're working on, whatever you're trying to tell them, but they'll see it in a different light. They'll see you beyond just somebody who's trying to sell them something.
Yeah, exactly. So principle 2 here, be consistent. This may seem self-evident, but it's something that we see again and again. I cannot tell you how many company websites that you go out and look at where they started a blog and they've got 5 posts that they did like 4 years ago when the person who was championing that blog was still at the company and that person left, and they haven't updated it since. The content is not easy to do consistently. And Mike can speak from experience on this in terms of being somebody who is responsible for putting out a monthly magazine and an every 2 weeks business newspaper. Mike, but why is it that we put them out on such a consistent schedule?
Well, we want people to be in the habit of reading these products at the same time consistently, and, columnists who appear, whether they're monthly in print or monthly in our digital only edition. We have things that people wait for, there are regular features in both publications, mixed in with new things, but people like that. I can expect that I'm going to be searching for Spot the Newt. If you're familiar with New Hampshire Magazine, we have this tiny little picture of a newt that we put on advertisements. It's a reader engagement, and it amazes me how much engagement we have from that. Both people sending in emails, but people sending in postcards from all over New England and beyond. I found the newts on page 1, page 5, page 6, page 11. And all of this is for one $50 gift certificate that we send out.
Yeah, and if that were not in every issue, if that were in every fourth issue, I can tell you people would not do it.
We tripped people up once because we had 5 newts instead of 4. And we heard about it in some notes. It's like, well, you tricked us, and we didn't do it on purpose, but we heard about it.
Yeah, this habituation is really important. This is, I don't think the New York Times puzzles, like people get addicted to connections or strands or any of these other morning word puzzles that the New York Times app has. And I think if those came out on an arbitrary basis, once every 11 days or something, they, they wouldn't work. So habituation is super important, but it's also important for another reason. And really these first 2 points, both are in support of this other reason. And that is, it's really good for your search engine optimization, for your SEO. It's good when Google sees that you are creating content on a consistent basis and putting new things on your website, putting new things on your channels. And the same with filling a need or solving a problem. It's great for search because people are out there typing into search questions that they're looking for answers to. I see that we have a comment in the chat. Kelly McCutcheon says, consistent doesn't mean every day, 3 posts a day, being able to commit to once a week or once a month. Agree totally. This is and maybe this is a really important part of that consistency discussion, which is if you are don't set yourself up for failure by saying we're going to do this 3 times a day, every single day. Come up with, wherever your organization, whether it's a group, if you have a content team or a marketing team, or it's just you and you're the solo person responsible for this, be aware of your limitations and set your publishing schedule based on those so you can be consistent. Much more important than doing 3 and not doing any more for the next 2 weeks or whatever.
And keep in mind, you could do a whole bunch of them. Just if you're going to launch this, maybe wait a couple months until you have, 6 or a dozen different pieces that you can have, so that you have that schedule and you can maintain that schedule. With a magazine, for example, we have stories sitting in our queue that were written a few months ago. They're seasonal. So, our January, February, March, April stories are already in. And that's something you can do with blog posts.
Yeah, we, in an ideal world, maybe talk about that a little bit. And I've already jumped past this bullet point, but I think it's a really important and useful one to think about when you're talking about consistency. Mike, can you talk a little bit about how important an editorial calendar is? And well, first, what is an editorial calendar? And from a publishing perspective, why it's important, but also why it would be important from a marketing or a content marketing perspective.
Well, it gives your audience a sense of where you're going, what they can look for, what they can expect. From on our side, it helps us organize our year, but it's also a blueprint where we're going to write about certain subjects throughout the year, certain features, but also within that framework, we're also going to do things that aren't on there. So it doesn't constrain you, but it helps for our advertisers. It helps us show them, hey, here's something you might want to connect your advertising with, because we're writing about health, we're writing about, or in Business of You, we're writing about events and meeting spaces, we're writing about things that they might want to connect with, because that's the audience that they're also trying to reach.
Yeah, and that's perfectly aligned with what you folks who are out there doing marketing for your various businesses are also going to be thinking about instead of thinking about are we doing health in this issue of business review? So we're going to be a great opportunity for healthcare advertising. You may be thinking, okay, we have a product launch coming out. We have an anniversary coming up later in the year, et cetera. And that, that is also going to be something that you're going to want to have in that editorial calendar so that everything that you're writing for content, especially if you're writing it ahead of time, lines up with what your business objectives are for this year or for this quarter or however far ahead you're planning. Um, Another super important principle is to find an authentic voice. And I'll make my first mention of AI. You all know we're gonna dig deep into AI at the end of this session, including sharing Yankee Publishing's draft AI guidelines. Because I think this is really important right now. But ChatGPT, no matter or Perplexity or whichever generative AI tool that you're using, is not your authentic voice, even if you try and train it to be your authentic voice. But your authentic voice it's going to be different for every single company, and it's going to be something that you really have to explore and come up with. But readers know if it's not you, and readers know if if you're toning things down too much, or if you're trying to be funny when you're not, your product, your service, your company is not funny. And so finding that authentic voice, super important. Mike, any tips on how you help writers find a voice as an editor?
Well, as a writer and editor, I think finding voice takes a long time for writers. I think I remember early on a professor commenting on I was applying for an internship or something, and she was critical about he could use a sense of voice, get a better voice, and I'm like, what are you talking about? And over time, I realized what she was talking about, and that's just the way you look at the world is going to inform your writing, and people recognize that. I listened to a consultant a few weeks back talking about marketing, and he said, don't you have a story first before we even start the market. Great advice. A lot of what he said was interesting and knew a lot about AI, but then he said, you can create 1,000 pieces of content in 3 weeks with AI. And I thought, well, I wouldn't want to read any of that content. So, I mean, you could get a lot, even if you get good numbers, you also have to think about how deep are those contacts, right? I'm sitting in my basement, which is full of thousands of CDs and hundreds of albums. And I can pull out albums that were huge hits that everybody had, and people may be able to once in a while. I can think of things that didn't sell so well, but the people who listen to these artists have a very deep and strong relationship with those musicians, to the point where they'll go see them anywhere. Maybe there'll be 200 people in the room. You got to think about those things too, right? How deep are those connections? There are lots and lots of shallow connections, or fewer but stronger, more meaningful connections. So those are the things you think about and back to your voice, it's being authentic, right? And finding a way to talk about your company that makes it unusual, or makes people see how you stand out in a way that's different from everybody else, which is hard to do.
Yeah, and I would add that this is going to go back to what we said about audience before too, which is you have to find your authentic voice, but it has to be your authentic voice that is a voice that will be able to communicate with whatever your audience is, and it comes back to knowing who those are. Just like you have an authentic voice when you're talking to your boss, you have an authentic voice when you're talking to your great grandmother, you have an authentic voice when you're talking to your kids, but you're not using, but your voice is different. And it's tailored for the audience that you have. And so you really do need to know that as well. We do have one other question in the chat right now. It is, what are the best days or times that are the best for posting? I'm going to give an answer that will probably be frustrating to you. And that is, you really have to test this. This comes back to a couple of questions. One is, who's your audience? What days and times are they online? What are you posting? Are you posting to a blog? Are you posting to social media? Are you putting out a print publication? All of those sorts of things. But let's take email as an example, because it's an easy one to talk about. that's always a question that people say is like, what's the best time to send out my email newsletter? Well, it really depends on where your audience is. Are they international? Are they all in this time zone? Are they local? What are you asking them to do? Are you asking them to read something quickly or go fill out a long form? We've found that folks, who were asking to fill out a long form, we might have better luck with that on, a later afternoon towards the end of the week when people are starting to check out a little bit and are not under a heavy meeting schedule. But what that really points to is, and I have this in a later bullet point that I don't even know if we'll get to because this conversation's going so well. But you really have to be married to your analytics on this. Post things, watch what people do, post them at different times, watch what people do, and see when they perform better. If you're watching your analytics, whether it's your Google Analytics for your website or your Facebook business analytics or your email newsletter analytics, they are going to show you exactly what you need to know about when the time is right. We do have another comment in the chat. It's saying, this is a great question. This is from Carrie Eaton. She says, Tuesday morning emails have been our best open rates. I do agree with that. Like if I were going to make generalizations, that's one that's usually pretty good.
Yeah, ironically, when people are busiest is when you're going, particularly what you're trying to reach, are more likely when they're going to look at something if they're in work mode, right? I have a friend who owns a couple of comedy clubs in Denver, and she refers to certain weekends as potato salad weekends, and those are like holiday weekends, right? They don't book any big national acts in the club Memorial Day weekend or Labor Day weekend and things like that. So, by the same token, long holiday weekends, Fridays, things like that. That's obvious, but things to think about. If you're going to spend a bunch of money on something, newspapers everywhere I've worked over the years, we're not going to put a big project in the Sunday paper on a weekend when we know people are at the beach, right? So those are some things that's not analytics. It's kind of like more anecdotal, but there's definitely the middle of the week probably is your best spot for most situations.
Yeah, and I just got a Teams message too from our digital team, who are also watching today and chimed in to say that the emails that we send, our email newsletters for New Hampshire Business Review and New Hampshire Magazine and for our customers, tend to perform best sent Tuesday to Thursday afternoons. But that's, and again, this is why I said it really depends on your audience and what kind of content you're sending out and so forth. But that was our experience for some of our emails. So let's get back to the presentation here. Have a point of view. I don't think we have to dig too much into that, but you better be saying something, right? Avoid jargon. There are some industries where this is really hard to do, but if if you read through something that you wrote, and I'm and as guilty of this as anybody, and you read it through and you think, wow, that sounds super smart and erudite, maybe go back through and make it simpler. And Mike, how much jargon do you pull out of business press releases that get sent in for the business review?
Fair amount, and I think the first thing you want to avoid is acronyms. I let them in here and there, but when you have a long title, then in parentheses there's an acronym, you want to limit that as much as possible because people stop reading, when they start with the alphabet soup. And if you're talking about technical information, you just want to break it down, right, and make it so that one of the cliches with journalists is if you're telling a story, you're going to write a story. How would you relate that story if you were sitting with a friend at a bar? This is what happened. This is what's cool about it. If their eyes glaze over and they start looking at somebody else, maybe you're not using the right language, right? So you want to take everything and break it down and make it easy to understand. Otherwise, you lose. That's the biggest problem that anybody has with trying to, whether you're printing, you're publishing articles, you're doing blog posts, is getting people to read it all, right? So you really want to have a strong hook. You want to pull them in. Sometimes as an editor, my job is looking at a story that somebody put together and it's really good, but maybe it starts in the wrong place. I'll give you an example. because I was talking about it on the radio this morning. This is a fantastic story by Emily Riley. You guys might remember Jeffrey Holt. About a year ago, actually a year ago this month in Hinsdale, the town announced that they had received 3.8 million from Jeffrey Holt, who had died in June. But he set up a donor advisor fund with the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. And one of the requirements was that they could not reveal that it was him until 6 months after he died. And the story originally talked about the town. And I looked at it and thought, well, what's really more interesting is this guy who lived in a mobile home park, rode around on a lawnmower, and wore his clothes down until they were completely useless. That's where the story needed to start, because that's the most compelling thing about this story. Yeah, you want to find where's the right place to begin, right? You might begin at the end of your story and then circle back to it. You want to find the place that people will want to keep reading.
Yeah, Mike, here's another question, and I love these questions that are coming in because they're we could just be walking through the bullet points in this presentation, and as I said, we at the pace we're going, I don't even think we're going to get through half of them, but that's okay because these questions are fantastic. And this is one I think that's perfect for you, Mike. How can an organization with many content creators across units establish and maintain a consistent voice? And should it? I'll answer the part that is, should it? Yes. But in a broad sense. But then, Mike, what do you do? Because you have a lot of writers with individual voices, and we want to bring those voices out, but they also have to be the voice of New Hampshire Magazine or New Hampshire Business Review.
Yeah, I mean, there's some parameters there. You want to find a consistent voice. You also don't want to trump down on something that has a personality in it, right? I mean, as long as it's within your parameters, what kind of organization is your organization? Very serious? Is it playful? What's the right tone? And sometimes that tone is going to change depending on the article. With New Hampshire Magazine, we're more of a feature-oriented publication, but occasionally we do some more serious writing. So you want to find that balance. I think there's certainly language, the type of language, simplicity of language, but you want to make sure that what's the philosophy of your company, what are the types of things that you want to talk about that have a consistent theme. But you probably just have, maybe an editor or two, somebody you work with who will take a look at what's before it's going out, so a little bit of quality control so that everything does have a consistent feel to it. How those stories are arranged, how long are they? How long are things like short quotes and long quotes? How they're formatted. People are used to seeing things a certain way, and those are things we play with all the time. How the story is going to look on the page, how the photos are going to play, and those are things you want to think about. It's not just the words, but the whole package, the whole presentation. If it's a blog post, are they all roughly the same size? Is it episodic? Do they connect to each other from one to the other? Do you circle back to some things you've already talked about? A lot of things to think about. I think the most important thing, is to be compelling and consistent. You can work on whether you have that same voice over time, because that voice isn't gonna happen all at once. It's gonna take some time to develop.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And it's such a challenging thing, but you see even when you see like whether it's big magazine companies, Harper's has a voice, but then they have many incredible writers who have their very unique voices, and it's just that mirroring of those two things. And I do think there's room within like a big enterprise, like that's not a publisher but is doing content for the sake of marketing its business, to have people with unique voices who you always look to. Maybe you've got somebody who's really funny and writes this really funny blog, but it still has to fit within the broader voice of the organization and have those standards that you described.
But don't be afraid to be a little funky. I mean, I'll tell you the campaigns that when people pitch, I've been hearing pitches from public relations folks and companies for decades, and I can remember, bits and pieces, but the ones that stand out the most are when they told me a story. I thought, you know what? Okay, I'm going to buy that. I'm going to do that. I'll give you one fairly recent example. Merchants Fleet, which is the much bigger part of the Merchants Auto company. Merchants Auto is actually a very small percentage revenue-wise, the Merchants Fleet aspect. They sell to they create fleets for Amazon and pest control companies, all kinds of stuff, and they're huge. They're a nationwide company. Well, a couple of years ago, their then CEO, and they had another executive come in and work with him. They discovered just from chatting that they remembered each other from high school. They were rivals. They were on football teams that played each other. They were rivals. And the pitch was, hey, now we've got these guys were rivals in high school, and now they're playing on the same team. Now that's just a little but it gave me enough to play with to be able to talk about them and frame the story. And it might sound a little hokey, but it was fun. And it made talking about something that's kind of complicated. What's fleet management, right? And to be able to break it down and show what these guys are doing and how they were trying to grow the company.
Yeah, that's having there's something personal there. And again, something interesting. Here's what's not to do. Let's dive into this. This is fun. First, create content without thinking about search. So I already mentioned that search is, if you do all the things that we were talking about earlier, well, you're doing search well. And in some ways, a couple of years ago, Google started to make it really clear that from its perspective as a search company, what it didn't want people doing is playing a bunch of tricks or trying to technically game the system. What it really wanted people to do is create useful content for specific audiences. And that's really the heart of, I think, what good content marketing is anyway. So if you went and you read Google's creator guidelines now, you would find that a lot of, aside from specific technical SEO stuff, a lot of what we're talking about is is really relevant to being effective in SEO. Other things you can do though, and I want to give a quick example here. You can do some keyword research as you're writing your content to think about which keywords are most effective in search that also fit the story you're trying to tell. And as a really specific example, I was once the publisher of a magazine called Military and Aerospace Electronics. And I had just come from being the VP of digital operations at a newspaper company. And so I'd spent a lot of time thinking about search. And when I first got there, one of the things I noticed is we were writing a ton of stories about something called a UAV. A UAV is an unmanned aerial vehicle, and that was one of the correct terms for what that is. Mike, I don't know if you can guess what the term that is in much more common usage for that is.
I was looking up my next story about Iron Man 2, so I'm going to throw that back to you.
All right. So most common parlance was drone, right? And so when I took a quick look at the search volume for UAV versus the search volume for drone, search volume for drone was hundreds of times larger than the search volume for UAV. So what I asked our editors to do was not to ever use the wrong word for the wrong thing, but in cases where words were interchangeable, or in cases where you might be able to legitimately use both in a story, to make sure they got the word drone into those stories as they were writing them. And it had a significant impact on our search traffic because that's what people search for when they're trying to figure this stuff out. So it's, and however that applies to your business, it does. There are terms, there are keywords, and there are a lot of tools. This isn't an SEO presentation, or we'd get into the tools for those, but there are a lot out there. A quick Google search will point you to some free keyword research tools, and it's worth doing that as you're writing your stories.
And that's what I was looking at when I should have been paying attention to the teacher in class. But this is a image of Iron Man 2. And this is when Tony Stark meets Elon Musk, who is playing himself. At the time this movie came out, I was working for a business magazine in Denver, and Crocs is mentioned in the movie. Crocs is based in Colorado, in the Boulder area at the time. I'm not sure if they're still there, but Crocs was huge. And there was a moment in that movie where Iron Man says, "Time to take off your socks and put on your Crocs." And I heard that in the movie and I thought, okay, I'm going to play with this and write a column and hit as many things as I can. Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man 2, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Crocs, just to see how my numbers light up. And that column did very well because it had so many keyword searches. It was local, and it just happened to be a local company that for just a little piece of a movie had this great international attention.
Yeah, exactly. So consider search as you create your content. Do not ignore your analytics. We already talked about this too, so I won't belabor it. But for almost everything you're doing, look at the analytics. It'll tell you whether what you're doing is bringing value or whether you should be adjusting and doing something else. The last thing any of us want to do is spend a lot of time creating content that nobody wants, needs, or is looking at. Do not try and write for everyone. As tempting as it would be to say, my audience is everyone in the world and my business sells a service that everyone in the world wants. If you approach the writing like that, you will not create interesting content. It will be generic and no one will want it. Maybe that's stating it in a kind of a heavy-handed way, but really this goes back to know who your audience is and write for them. Somebody had asked a question earlier, when you have multiple teams, don't operate in silos when you're doing this. If you have a content team, that content team should be talking to your product team. They should be talking to your sales team, like across the board, even operations, like everyone, so that you understand what's happening across the company, and the content is reflecting that and reflecting the business agenda of everybody across the company. And then don't make it all about you. This is, I don't know how many people listening right now are salespeople, or who have done sales and are now doing marketing, or are business owners. Feel free to sound off in the chat as to your particular role. But, one of the things years ago that I think was pointed out to me again and again in helping folks write proposals for sales was that you do not want to start that proposal talking about how awesome your company is. You want to start that proposal talking about how awesome your customer is, what they need, how well you understand already what they need, and that's why your company will be a good fit to solve their problem. But it is such a temptation to start with, we're great, and that's why you should hire us, as opposed to, you are this, you have this challenge to solve, you have this opportunity to get better, to grow, to be more profitable, and we can help you do that. So that it's just that shifting of mindset. Don't create content just to check a box. Also very tempting, we're busy. You got assigned to do content for your company's website, and you're just going to check that off every week. The content really should say something, and it should have a specific objective. And that objective is going to lead people through the funnel here. You can see I typically, there were almost no pictures in this deck because I don't really like these kind of charts, but it's useful to think about this funnel going in both directions. Your content marketing can affect every single part of this, from initially attracting a visitor who's trying to solve a problem for themselves, and they become a lead, opportunity sales, but your content is also keeping them engaged after the fact and keeping them aligned with your brand. The content should have a goal, and it'll be one of these as you think through, or it might be more than one, but it should have at least one of these. Oops, I went too far. It should have at least one of these as its primary goal. I won't explain what every one of these is, but I will say that the slides will make available after the presentation. So no need to jot it all down.
I want to just talk a little bit about not making it all about you. And this is from the writing and editing perspective, but it certainly can be applicable to how you're telling your story for your companies. Young writers tend to want to write in the first person. They want to, and they'll say, so-and-so told me, or so-and-so. And sometimes that works, but too often for me, it becomes more about the writer and less about what they're writing about. And I think that the goal I've always had is to try to write something where people are forgetting that they're reading, and they're just hearing the story. If you keep sticking yourself in there, it's kind of it's obtrusive. You're getting in the way of the story. So you want to tell that story the best way you can, and a soft sell, right? You want to show what it is you're doing, what it is you can do without pumping up yourself. That's a hard thing to pull off, but you can do that if you focus on the story you want to tell.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think in cases where that kind of first person storytelling does work, it works because, and you see it like long form interview writing in some of the national magazines, right? And you'll see somebody talk about their interview with Robert Downey Jr. and say, I met him here, we had coffee, and and I think when those work well, it's when that voice, that first person voice, is a stand-in for the reader. So it's done not so much to like saying, I'm this great writer and look how interesting I am. It's like, I'm bringing you into this moment that I had with this person, and you're sitting at the table with Robert Downey Jr. So that feels like the difference to me.
It's harder to pull off, and it's, something that writers can develop over time.
Yeah. So quickly, because I do want to get to the AI part of this discussion. I think that's really valuable, and some of you folks are probably pretty curious about that. I'm going to just roll these all out. Um, these are all just useful things to think about as you're creating content. Do not be daunted by this list. Don't let it stop you from creating content. I'll jump down and say competitors' most successful content. That's really useful to know if you can figure it out. If you can only make a stab at figuring that out by looking at which of their social media posts gets the most engagement, then that's good enough. You don't need their analytics from the back end. First, because you probably can't get them. But secondarily, like each one of these things, do the best you can with them. But be thinking about them all. Like, your most successful articles in terms of shares and links is super important. What are the types of content that your audience shares? What are the types of content that your audience reads? Etc. So I won't belabor all of these, but they're all useful things to get sort of ideas churning and to break you out of writer's block. These are some of the key trends in content marketing this year. Balance between AI and human might be one of the biggest ones. We're all trying to figure this out. And I think from everything that I'm seeing, the most successful approach to this is involving using AI to support human content development, not the other way around. Short form video is really important. You have to decide what you want to do with that short form video. If it's just for the sake of, of getting views on a reel, that's great. But is it so short? Is it actually selling your product? Is it advancing your brand? That's a challenge. Search traffic is likely to decrease. We on our New Hampshire Magazine, New Hampshire Business Review sites have not seen a significant decrease or actually any decrease in search traffic this year, but we are looking at that as a potential risk factor, particularly as AI search gets more dominant. There's a search engine called it's both a search engine and a generative AI tool called Perplexity that just rounds up search results and drops them all into its own platform with no advertising around it at all. Then, of course, there are also AI results that you're seeing at the top of traditional search engine results, pushing organic results down further. So you do have to be aware search traffic may not have the juice that it used to have. Businesses are building branded communities, and improved storytelling is a big piece, and I want to switch right over to that. This is sort of goes back to the heart of what we were talking about at the very beginning and through this whole presentation. It's that when we are telling really good stories, really authentic stories that really get to the heart of who your audience is and what their problem is, what their challenge is, what their dreams are, their aspirations, their hopes. When you're evoking emotion in them and in a way that connects them to your brand because you're actually bringing this value to them, that's really powerful. And that doesn't come out of like just writing a product description, right? You have to know who they are, and that's at the heart of really telling a good story. The why does storytelling work? I talked a little bit about this in the beginning. It's we are wired to um, we are wired to hear stories from our very earliest human experience. There is science around this that suggests that language itself evolved in order for us to tell each other stories. Our stories and what we said about each other in early societies were the way that human society functioned. There were stories instead of laws. This is how cultures began to grow up, and because of that, we are so deeply connected to the power of story that when you do a brain scan on somebody who's listening to a story, a powerful piece of fiction, say, their brain lights up in the same way that it lights up when you are actually having the experience that the character in the story is having. It's remarkable. And so because of all that, we recall things better when we hear them through stories. We connect emotionally, and that emotional connection aids recall. So overall, this is why, again, take it as you will. This is coming from people who tell stories for a living. So maybe we're biased about this, but um, this is at the heart of the human experience, and it's something that's doesn't change when you move into business. It doesn't change when you move into marketing. Stories are at the heart of how people communicate with each other. Um,
When Ernesto and I gave a similar presentation to the chamber during Access 24, we talked a little bit about, what do you remember most from stories, right? It's not going to be the facts necessarily, right? You're going to remember how these stories made you feel. You're going to remember the human part of it. I'll give you an example. I heard Ned Gordon speak, and he's an executive with the Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute. He's involved in business development, and he talked about what Army's doing at a recent summit of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. And I think what people will remember most about his talk is not how the biofab effort is happening in the mill yard, but that he gave one of his kidneys up so that his wife could get a kidney. His wife suffers from kidney disease, as does his daughter. So his reason for being involved in this project is to end the donor list so that people don't need kidneys and through regenerative medicine can have their organs repaired. Powerful story, right? I mean, you put a lot out there when you tell that story. It's a kind of you're vulnerable. You're telling something deeply personal. But I will remember that whenever I see him. That's a compelling reason. So that also makes me think about, why do you do what you do? Why did you start your company? Why did your company exist? There's very often going to be a very, very compelling reason for why you do what you do or where you do it. I remember writing about an engineering firm in Colorado and Boulder. And the only reason why they were in Boulder is because, similar to New Hampshire, they just wanted to live in Boulder, right? There's always going to be some reason why your company started. What was the path? What was the journey? People want to hear that because it makes them realize why you're passionate about what you do. And that passion leads to why people would want to do business with you, that you care so much about this particular business subject, whatever it is you do, that you're putting your all into it.
yeah, excellent. So next couple of things, I'm going to move just. I'm going to just skip through a lot of this because I think you can read this. Show, don't tell. That always remains a super important one. This is I'll basically just tell you what this is so that you can look at it later when you get the slides. I gave you a couple of different storytelling frameworks because sometimes we just need a place to get started, right? So if you're sitting there looking at that blank page saying, where do I begin? These storytelling frameworks are nice. These are the shape of what good, compelling stories look like. In the case of these two, they're actually the structures for plays or for novels or for short stories. But you can use those as tools to think about even in the very shortest of short stories that you're creating in your content marketing. Mike, we've got storytelling principles in action. You talked about the blues and Tabasco. Um, what- Anything else you want to say there real quick before I just want to make sure we get to the AI thing before we have to go.
Very, very quickly, you see the biotech boom story, and when you talk about voice and bringing your perspective into stories, whenever you write anything, you're going to bring who you are in your history to that story, and you should when it makes sense. In this case, this is about the biofab operation I talked about just a little bit ago in the mill yard, where Dean Kamen is trying to set up basically a place where companies can develop further the mass production of human body parts, tissues, organs, all that stuff. And it's about the mill yard. It's about Manchester, and Manchester was, as we most of us know, was once the textile, capital of the world, right? Not just the United States, but the world. And we work in the Wambach Mill building. I'm the third generation of my family to work in that building. Grandfather, father, uncles, all worked there when it was a textile mill. So that informs my writing. I'm from here, and so that it's not necessarily all in the story, but it makes me think about how to frame that story. What's at stake here, right? It's about Manchester trying to reclaim its glory as the capital of something, and now it's going to be human body parts.
Amazing. Okay, AI in content marketing, AI in general. I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly and just say, use AI as a tool to help you write. Do not let AI be the writer for you. The reader can tell still, and even if we get to the point where the reader can't tell, I don't know that we're going to get there. But storytelling is about authenticity, and you really that I think will always shine through. But here are some ways that we're using it now. We use it for brainstorming constantly. Give me 25 things that I should be thinking about if I'm telling a story about such and such a thing. It's great at just giving you all of these things. Oh, I hadn't considered that. Good idea. It's good for outlining things. If you use it for research, it's really useful, but you really have to verify it because it's still every other day I see generative AI come up with something that just doesn't exist, isn't real. It's good for utility content. We use it in that way, like maybe to take a list of events and put them into a consistent framework or format. It's good for brainstorming SEO. It not too bad for writing proposals. Like if you know everything you want to put into a proposal and you can say it out loud, you can say it out loud into your generative AI tool and say, just structure that for me. Then you go through and clean it up, make sure it's all right, but it can save time. And finally, meeting summaries. We tend to record and transcribe a lot of our meetings now, and we will drop those into generative AI and say, give us the action items and a 2-page summary. And then sometimes you look at that 2-page summary and say, it's too much information. We didn't need it. Give us a 1-page summary. And so super useful. These are Yankee Publishing's AI guidelines that I've condensed a little bit. We do not publish creative stories with AI generated text. And by creative stories, we mean things that are bylined, right? Typically, but anything that you're looking at and thinking is a story. It's not AI generated. Utilitarian stuff, editing down a press release, summarizing long reports into bite-sized chunks. We use that with certain understandings. Use it for brainstorming, fact checking. We are really take a strong stand in making sure that people who are contributing to our publications, we do use a lot of freelancers, are not using AI when they do this. We disclose when we use AI generated images or video in content. And at this point, the AI tools that are built into things like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator are so powerful that it's hard not to have at least something that has been touched by AI within image rendering and manipulation.
I just want to add one thing. AI will help you with a lot of grunt work and leaving you more time to focus on the creative individual things about your company. For example, AI won't know that the reason your company has a keg of beer, as I found out with one company I interviewed once in Denver, has a keg of beer, not just as a perk to bring in young people, but that's the original benefit for your company at a time when your company could not afford to give health care and 401ks and all that. You could afford to have beer around on Friday. So you did that. Those things are the things that people remember. AI can help you with, maybe taking your technical information and making it more digestible, stuff like that. But the creative and unique things that will stand out, that's going to come from humans.
Yeah. It's really good at helping out with personalization, but if you're going to use it to personalize user experiences, you have to still be careful with how you handle reader data. And when we say reader data, we're talking about our readers on our websites, but that's also your readers on your business websites. We want people to know who wrote our content. We make sure that we byline things. And we build trust by supporting facts and claims with reliable sources or links. This is another useful thing. Maybe this is a good way for us to wrap up is, as we're talking about storytelling, all of this storytelling doesn't matter if people do not believe you. You have to be able to back up what you're saying. And as much as in a story, the tradition used to be we'd look for three sources to validate things that we had been told as reporters. Mike and I both worked as reporters. You as a marketer can be thinking about that with your company. If you're saying our company, makes the best milkshakes in Manchester, where's the validation for that? Nobody believes you when you just say we're the best at anything, because everybody says that now, right? But if you can find A, we won this award, B, here's a testimonial, and C, here's the National Milkshake Council telling us something about our milkshakes. But I picked the weirdest example. But have the facts to back it up, because we live in an era right now where it's so easy to generate bad stories, untrue stories, uncompelling stories, that the internet is overflowing with junk content. We want to make sure we're making the best content that is compelling, that's authentic, and that people can believe what we're saying. And by providing that that information that backs it up, by showing, not telling, we're able to do that. And I think that's about where we're going to leave it here. We kept you over by 3 minutes. Thanks everybody for hanging in. I did want to ask one last question, if you're game, which is, does anybody remember what my grandmother did for work? This is sort of, if you do and you want to put that in the chat, this was the example that I had given, of course, in the beginning of how storytelling is good for remembering facts. And they're coming in, and you all know, not only did you know she was a nurse, many of you knew she was a nurse in the war, many of you know which war. So it is, stories are really good for getting people to remember facts. And they will remember facts not just about my childhood tow experience, but about your business. So it was World War II, Mark. Well, thank you all. We appreciate you so much. Mike, thank you for joining in and adding authenticity and credibility to this program today. And thank you. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day.